It's a disaster. It's a disaster because Spotify's taken all the money the acts are taking, which is a crime.
That money goes directly to the label. These streaming services basically treating it like we owe them, which is not the way it should be.
Piracy is what killed aspects of this industry. Streaming is bringing it back.
I just called up my management and said, we're out of there, get me off.
Life should have been sunshine and rainbows for Spotify founder Daniel Ek, but it wasn't. He had just sold his advertising business at Vertigo, making him a millionaire. He had it all, but his life had no meaning. Daniel has always been desperate for success. At age 13, he was making websites. Then at 18, he sold his website business. He would then go on to make various businesses, none of which particularly took off. But in his early 20s, he sold his little advertising company for $1 million. Here's the thing, for someone like David, doing nothing and partying all day was fun at first, but it was nothing compared to the thrill of watching his hard work pay off. He needed some meaning in his life again. After some long thinking and soul searching, David found the answer. He decided he was going to completely change the way we listen to music. At the same time of this realization, Napster had become super popular. It's a service that lets people easily share music files for free, but then it got into some heavy lawsuits. The thing is, peer-to-peer technology that allowed people to easily share files for free was growing. Some similar websites then came after that, including the Pirate Bay. Daniel Ek himself loved using these free music services because it was easy, but it was also having a very negative impact on the music industry. Less people paying means less money for the real artists who deserve the work, which will eventually mean less good music. So he had the idea to develop a platform where you could stream music and the ad revenue would go to the creators, like YouTube, but for music. Now the idea was born, Daniel got his friend Marvin on board, and in the summer of 2006, Spotify was born. This is where they ran into their first problem. It was a question of who came first, the chicken or the egg. They couldn't convince the music producers that their product worked without building it, and they couldn't build it without the music from the producers. So they pirated millions of dollars worth of music for free, and they built the first version of Spotify. It was sleek, it was fast, and most importantly, it worked. Now they face their second problem. How can you convince the music producers to license their music when you've disrespected their business by building the platform illegally? Understandably, this received a lot of backlash. Let's break this down though. The three biggest music producers are Sony, Warner, and Universal. If you've got all three on board, then the rest will follow. But once he explained the idea of free music, they panicked. The ad revenue would be unstable, and the producers want a fixed price for their music. Daniel was in crisis mode. The app that him and his team spent so long building was about to fail before it even had a chance to succeed. Daniel was super stressed, and at the last minute, he came up with the idea of having a paid subscription of the app, making it so there is a second stream of income. And also agreed to give 70% of all earnings to record companies. It wasn't good, but it worked. On Spotify's end, this was unclear if it was actually a good deal. Will only keeping 30% of revenue be enough to run the app? But they had no choice but to accept. Other negotiations will go on for a couple more years, but in 2008, Spotify officially launched. The app blew up. It was getting millions of downloads, and all of David's hard work seemed to have paid off. But then their second problem came. The deal with the record companies was fundamentally flawed. Because Spotify relied on them to keep their app legal and hence working, they had to accept anything they said. They would frequently make Spotify remove features from the free version to push more people to the paid version of the app, making David's vision less and less to what it was originally. But that wasn't it. Many individual artists like Pink Floyd, Metallica, The Beatles, and even Taylor Swift pulled their music from Spotify because they claimed it didn't pay enough. The thing is though, it wasn't actually up to Spotify how much individual artists got. Because the record companies owned shares in Spotify, they profited from the growth and took a large chunk of revenue, leaving only scraps for artists. It only gets worse for artists from the fake streams happening, where people replay songs to increase their income. It was estimated that fake streams could be taking $300 million a year from the artists, but Spotify really don't care because they still keep their 30%. The thing is, Spotify was getting too big, and those artists that pulled their music usually put it back. they realized it was better to get some royalties than none at all. Their growth was massive, and it wasn't stopping. In 2011, Spotify had over 1 million paying users. Now we get into the third problem. Spotify still wasn't profitable yet. Big competitors start to show up with their own streaming platforms. Apple launched Apple Music, YouTube launched YouTube Music, and even Amazon now has their own music platform. But Apple was especially bullying Spotify. Because the way people downloaded Spotify was through the Apple Store, they were making it harder for Spotify to update their app, deliberately taking long to approve updates. Not to mention, Apple also took a 30% chunk in all in-app purchases, which wasn't very good considering Apple was now competing with Spotify. Despite all this, Spotify still kept its lead. There was a looming issue coming too. If all these streaming platforms offer the same thing, then what was so special about Spotify? Daniel had two solutions for this problem, and both of them would end in a lot more problems. The first thing they did was use AI to create personalized playlists for every person. They first started with the Discover Weekly, a playlist that updates each week using user data to find the right music for the right person. Sounds good, right? Well, this also meant that Spotify had been secretly collecting data on all the users, which received a lot of backlash. More controversy arose when it became known that Spotify was featuring unknown artists who turned out to be fake. Their music was licensed from Epidemic Sounds, a royalty-free library with over 30,000 sounds. This meant that it was cheaper for Spotify and therefore would be more inclined to use them. Some criticized this for taking spots from genuine artists and diluting revenues. There were reports of Spotify potentially replacing real artists with AI-generated music. That wasn't it. A third of the music listened to on Spotify now comes from their recommendations, giving them the influence over the industry. They now have the power to promote or suppress any artist they like. Daniel initially wanted a free, ad-funded music library, but the platform evolved into a dark, technology-driven marketplace. Artists and listeners both contribute to the revenue. In fact, Daniel was named the most influential person in the music industry by Billboard in 2017. In 2019, Spotify started investing heavily in podcasts. This also came with its own problems. Spotify paid $100 million for Joe Rogan's podcast, and it was still paying scraps to the individual artists. Their goal is to own exclusive content, reducing the payouts to record companies and musicians as users spent more time on podcasts. Then, Spotify started censoring some podcasts and people got angry. But then they also got angry when Spotify didn't censor some other episodes which were also considered anti-vax. Despite the backlashes over the issues like the acquisition of Joe Rogan's podcast, Spotify's impact is undeniable. It is a key player in the transition from vinyl to streaming, which is now the largest revenue source for the music industry. Some believe Spotify has saved the industry from piracy, while others feel it's giving artists less money and gaining undue control over who succeeds in the music industry. What do you think? Let us know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.